Oh, what a Game 7 that was! I'm an early riser. I get up at just an ungodly time. So with that, I go to bed fairly early, and I watched the first half of it, and I was like, okay, I sort of thought this was going to happen. They weren't playing well, weren't looking good, down a bunch. So I turned it off at halftime, and I'm like, all right, I'll watch the rest when I get up if I can avoid hearing about, what happened when I get out of bed. I look at my phone, I've got 8 text messages, so I'm like, okay, well, I'm not feeling like they won, but let's just watch it through here. So I did. I almost woke my wife and daughter up. I was bouncing off the wall. It was just a great second half. Probably not so much for Nuggets fans, but as a Timberwolves fan, it was some of the best basketball we've seen of them, and they're putting it all together now, which is not something we're used to around here. I mean, it literally was 20 years ago the last time they've been in this spot. That's kind of a stretch of futility, to put it mildly. Yeah. It's hard to even think back how long ago it was when they were in this series. Man, was that fun. It's still going to be fun, too. This is a winnable series. It's going to be a good one, and we're excited for it.
No, it is going to be a lot of fun. Especially when you've waited that long. It's like waiting 86 years for a World Series. Oh, wait, I lived that already. Okay. So, I asked you a question last week. What do you look forward to on a schedule release? Is there something you look for first? You and I went back and forth on it. You said you might look into it further with some other people as to what they look for first. Did you find the time to come up with some of those answers just for the fun of it?
I did, and I jotted down my notes here. I don't know if this is going to be a surprise to anybody else, but I find this interesting. Of the 11 people I spoke to, people responded with, I don't know, I'm not sure. Yep. Something that sort of expressed the idea that they don't even know what they're looking at.
Right.
And the general sense that I got from people is they look at the whole schedule. Some people, their secondary answer was their week 1 opponent. Some said how many primetime games they had, or what dates were the primetime games. Some people are looking to go to the games themselves or kind of put together their work schedule with it. But by and large, the answers varied quite a bit from person to person. But generally speaking, it was there wasn't one solid thing. They list off a couple different things. If they're taking in the entire schedule just for what it is. Getting a sense of rivalry games, that was a big one. Whatever they would play. If those rivalry games were on prime time, I thought that was interesting. That was one of the more specific answers that I got. It seemed like a pretty eclectic group overall, and I would probably put myself into that as well. I noticed, looking at the Steelers' schedule when it came out, the first place I went to was week 1. Week 1 opponent, home or away, what they're doing with that. And then it was the rivalry games for primetime. How many of those do they get on primetime? How many are at home? Then I found myself checking out the rivals' schedule. Who are they playing the week before they play the Steelers? Some people felt that was something of note as well. And then I had a laugh because looking over the Steelers, the juggernaut final 8 games that they have, it's almost comical the way that it's set up. But for me, it's like that's not a schedule maker thing. That's they knew who they were playing, and they have a very the schedule is balanced as such that if you've got a pretty big hole at some point in your schedule, you've got a real advantage somewhere else. And I think that's what the Steelers have. They're 3 home games in a row, a primetime game at the tail end of that at home, a bye week, and then they're at Washington. That's a pretty nice stretch of games. And the schedule is only so big. You're always playing an NFL team. You're always playing good opponents, in my opinion at least. I know some people don't think that. Some are more winnable than others, but to face the teams the Steelers are at the end of the season, you got to face them all at some point anyway. Right. The Mike Tomlin often used, or at least it was used back in the day quite a bit more. Iron sharpens iron. You're playing playoff level competition at the end of the season. That's where you're trying to get to anyway. And on top of that, theoretically, if all of your easier opponents are earlier in the season, then you can stack up enough of a record that you play 500 football down the stretch, get you a ticket to the dance, which is really what you're aiming for here anyway. So overall, I think it kind of, it was a schedule release. They're going to play these teams that we knew about. I don't find that there's great significance in the order in which they play them. And if any team, any fan base should recognize that, it should be the team that last year went 1-2 over the easiest stretch of games they'll ever have ever again, like they did last season, and rallied behind their third-string quarterback to still qualify for the playoffs. So for me, I don't think it really matters. It all comes out the same in the wash. Whether or not you can get to that maybe 9, but probably 10 win mark, make it to the postseason and take it from there. That's really what it's always about.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I just thought I would ask. I mean, so Netflix will get Christmas, and I think I saw the number. Didn't they pay something like, I don't know, 60 to 80 million a game or something like that, or for the day?
For the day, yeah, they have the 2 games. I saw 120.
120.
2 games.
120, 2 games. So yeah, I was like, I said 60 million a game. Yep. 60 million a game. Yep.
Yeah. Which is that probably is market value, I would think. I haven't done the math to space it out over the ginormous contract they're giving to the broadcast, but to get 2 premium games, that price is going to be a little bit higher. And the ones they got are premium games. So, their business worth the money. I can see why they're doing it. I definitely see why the NFL wants to see whether it's going to work or not, because they'd love to sell off individual games at retail prices, which is what they're doing with Netflix, and kind of sending a message to everybody in that regard. They're not above doing that.
Okay, so why is it that as regular season games that which Fox, CBS, and NBC, and ESPN, ABC, and Amazon all paid for 10-year deals, why is it they don't get these games?
I think the literal answer to that is probably in the contract, where I'm sure the NFL has a clause to pull back something. Along with that, I'm just going to say this as an observer, not a lawyer. I didn't write the contract or anything like that. But my guess is the NFL had these earmarked for NFL Network.
Right. Okay.
They're not putting them on NFL Network for this reason or that reason. And, whatever it is they're doing right now with NFL Network, I'm not sure.
Right.
But my guess is they were not a part of the negotiation.
And plus, you'd be asking crews, for example, of camera people, sound people, truck people to work on Christmas Day. So, there's that part too.
Yep. Yeah, I can see that. However it is that they'll do that with whoever's cameras. I can't imagine Netflix is going to build out that audience. They'll probably subcontract somebody who's already doing it.
Sure.
That'll be interesting. Make a note of that for the future. I'm curious what they'll do with that, because if I remember correctly, when the NFL Network first came out and they were broadcasting games, it was a sight. I mean, they were not experienced. They really tried to do it on their own. You can get the broadcasters, talking about football. It's not real hard to get that, but that isn't the game. I mean, people don't understand how much is going on behind the scenes. And if you don't have an experienced crew that's working together, that has, that kind of boots on the ground level experience together, things get pretty messy. And it wouldn't surprise me if Netflix is going to try to do everything they can to avoid that and try to get somebody who's active already. But overall, yeah, I mean, they probably had their eyes set on this. Like I said, in some cases, it's smart to get the stability of the volume and give out the volume discount, to have that 10-year commitment, have a company largely planning its entire strategy around your product. You're going to get the attention that you want with it. You can grow and bend and flex with a strategic partner. At the same time, though, that retail rate, those one-off games, the a la carte method, I think there's value to that as well. I think the NFL has been asking themselves, what's the value of having this network in its current form when we could conceivably sell off individual games, provided the technology is available to keep the quality of the game that we're showing outstanding, and we don't have to pay for it and get even more per game than we do with our other rights partners. Now, does CBS like that? Does ESPN like that? Maybe, maybe not. I'm sure they would love to have a Christmas Day game, but the NFL probably smartly reserved major tentpole days like Christmas for their own use, and to be able to use that to get paid handsomely while experimenting with somebody else is a pretty good idea from a business perspective.
Okay. Last year when they did the schedule, there was a heavy emphasis, and there's a maximum number of primetime games you can get. And the Jets were, I think, one shy of it because of the Aaron Rodgers factor. And, of course, for the networks, every time the Jets were on after the opener with the Bills, there was no Aaron Rodgers. And we got to hear the Zach Wilson story over and over again. Right? Well, they're rolling the dice on them again. Are these the factors that make schedules so problematic for networks? Because, let's face it, you had a schedule built last year around a couple of guys, and he was one of them.
That's the inherent risk of that, but I found it funny. It's like, okay, we're for real this time. And the Jets are on primetime like 5 of the first 7 weeks or something, aren't they? I mean, it's like, wow. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure you want to put Aaron Rodgers on TV that much. We'll see. I do think the machinations that go on behind the scenes, I think we will hear about that in the coming years, if not immediately. But you have to think they're fighting tooth and nail over this. And the NFL, the NFL created this. I don't want to call it a problem, but the conflict that exists to the point now where they've pretty much done away with the affiliations with the conferences. It's not just Fox on
That's
NFC,
right.
CBS on AFC anymore. That's significant. It's something that people aren't going to really discuss and haven't really discussed. But all of that, I promise you, is just due to the perception. I don't even know if it's one way or the other, but to be realistic, there's a bit more action in the AFC right now than there is in the NFC. Yep. And if the broadcast rights partners are paying that much money, they want Aaron Rodgers games. It doesn't matter to them if they're playing somebody in the NFC or not. They want an Aaron Rodgers game. So at some point, they're going to have to say, look, we're going to end up doing this week by week and having a bidding process, putting this whole thing together. Is it a coincidence that the schedule came out later this year than it has any other year? I don't think it is. I think it's because that's what this has turned into now, and not that that's a bad thing. I'm not trying to claim conspiracy or anything. In a way, it's far more on them than it is the ravenous fan when the schedule comes out. They need to get things locked up, but until they can release the whole thing, they're not going to. So I think it came down to the 11th hour in a lot of ways of who's getting what game and where they're putting what. They put so many Aaron Rodgers games on prime time, and I would imagine, I haven't looked at it real closely, any opportunity that you get to put Taylor Swift in your stadium and give the rights partner 3.5 hours of exclusive video content of Taylor Swift, whether she's walking or sitting in a stadium suite. I don't think it matters to them, but they want that. That's worth a ton of money, and they're paying a ton of money for it. So do they really care about Tennessee and Jacksonville this week? No, I don't care. Give that to another network. I want this game, and I want it on primetime. This should be in this slot, whatever my primetime slot is. My most lucrative spot, that's where I want it. And you're having to really mitigate the argument between all of them, and they're bringing in more and more partners now. That process gets a lot more convoluted, and I think that's really why it is. It probably came out a good 2 weeks later than what we could have reasonably expected for it to have come out based on past schedule releases.
The reigning Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year is Cameron Hayward. Voluntary off-season workouts, no show. Does not have planned to attend OTAs because he wants a contract extension. This guy has been loyal to the organization. What's been your thought on, for the first time ever he's done this, what's been your thought about where he stands at this stage of his career with the Steelers?
I think in a way it's almost a double negative, because if the team doesn't want to give him an extension, what they're saying is that he's not the future leader for them. And if he's not a leader, I don't think that Cam Hayward and his Hall of Fame resume needs to be at OTAs. So call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, the question to me is, do the Steelers want to pay him $16 million with no future in place with, in my opinion, an all-time player for the franchise? I don't think that's the right way to go about business with certain guys. You know, others, you got to make tough decisions. But Cam Hayward's been your bedrock for a long time. Yeah. His contract is upside down. You know it is. Mm-hmm. If anything, I would have, I would have put money on the extension happening in March. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. It makes sense for both sides. Right. Cam probably take a few bucks off to get another year. Maybe it's 2 years. However you want to do the deal, so he can make roughly what he's going to make this season and give you a reasonable opportunity to keep him next year as well, because the defensive line is young. They've added a bunch of pieces to it, pieces you should be excited about. I think Keanu Benton's a great young player. But they've missed on a lot of guys that they've tried to add into those spots as well. You know, they never really recovered in a lot of ways from Stephon Tuitt, eventually retiring after taking a year off. You've got a good run out of Larry Ogunjobi. I'm not sure how much longer you can really count on that happening. But they've got to get younger at the position. They've definitely tried to do that. But bottom line, take age out of it. Watch Cam Hayward play last year and watch the rest of your defensive line. Are you telling me you don't need him? I don't think he's going to fall apart in a year. You need to get him in there, and you need to show the younger players this is what we expect. This is who we want you to emulate. And we know that because the league just gave him what it says anyway is its most valuable trophy this offseason. Yep. An award he was a finalist for I don't know, 19 straight years or something like that. Right. They finally gave it to him. Lifetime achievement, if anything, but he's earned that award several years. You know, not to downplay the accomplishments of anyone else that they gave the Walter Payton Man of the Year award to, but Hayward was on that level and has been for a long time. To me, the extension is a no-brainer. The fact that it hasn't happened yet, if anything, I think it's more, we're not going to commit to it now. And in a lot of ways, too, the stuff they won't tell you about is they'd like to get a look at you in person. What that means is you show up to OTAs, let's see what kind of shape you're in. We're going to decide from afar whether or not we want to give you a contract. Hayward's been around. He's been a union rep. He's not going to fall for that kind of thing. So he's not going to go to OTAs. It's voluntary. I don't think that anybody's going to hold it against Cam Hayward to not be there. He doesn't need to be there in that sense. He needs to prepare himself for the season. I trust that Cam Hayward, of all people, knows how to do that by this point in his career. He deserves an extension. I think the team is smart to give him one for a lot of reasons. It's something I see getting done, but this is how the game is played. You know, you kind of have to do these things. You can't give up the leverage you have as a player. I don't anticipate that it would extend into training camp, but I would think a deal will get done probably closer to that. But if Hayward doesn't want to show up and let them, see his 36-year-old self out there, I wouldn't blame him. I could see how that could be used against you. But put the film on and tell me the guy still is not playing at a high level in the NFL. They absolutely should give him the extension that he's earned, give him some more security, because I don't see a path right now that they can guarantee that they wouldn't need him next year too. You may as well tack on a year, split the money up a little bit, give him something for next year, but give him some security. He's earned that.
Always a pleasure, whether it's the NFL or the T-Wolves. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Go Wolves. Thanks for having me, guys.
Dennis, welcome back. Great to have you with us.
Steve, I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
I hope you're doing well, by the way. Let's get to some of our favorite topics, and that would be I always refer to these now as the Kessler cases because he's the one that's the central figure in all of them. But they are sitting down and they've been instructed to go through settlement talks. What have you learned from those settlement talks? And is there any opening that they can get this done before the trial starts in January?
Well, the story that emerged this week is that the Power Four are attempting to institute a revenue sharing plan with players. We don't know exactly who players, basketball, football, all of them, all of the minor sports, as a way to facilitate the settlement for the House case. Now, that doesn't necessarily settle the other cases, but which, as you said, Jeffrey Kessler had some of them. He doesn't have all of them. I think if they did settle this one, the House case is huge. It would indicate to a jury that there has been made progress in the antitrust area. What they want to do is avoid going to a jury. But they have to get House settled first because it goes to trial in January. We're 9 months away. That's in legal years, that's like a heartbeat.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to do this week.
All right, and are there two parts to this? One is damages to those who have gone through this but never were compensated and those who are currently involved. Does that sound right?
The class, from what I've read, the class in House, the class of athletes, is about 7,000 who have the 2018 to 2020. That was the period they put in the lawsuit that weren't properly compensated for their NIL rights and money from the broadcast contract. And a lawsuit, they estimate that to be something like $1.4 billion. Okay. If they lose at trial, I'm just giving you an example here. Automatically in U.S. law, antitrust, you lose at trial, damages for treble.
Right.
They would be on the hook, NCAA in the schools, for $4.2 billion. That would essentially end the NCAA. The forward piece, they want to settle, like just off the book, there's no money. I'm just trying to change the landscape with that lawsuit. These players get paid. So that's another reason why it's so important.
Yeah, when he means treble, this isn't the USFL case for $1 that ended up at $3. No. It's a little bit more. No. Now, Trev Alberts, and it may have been talking to boosters, whomever, I don't know, mentioned that he threw out the numbers of 15 to 20 million per year that athletic departments would have to come up with. Dennis, what would that then mean for athletic departments who are sitting there and have probably done 3 to 5 year projections and never counted on this being in there?
Yeah, you must have read my story for a couple of weeks ago. That's exactly what I wrote about. Like, how do ADs do future budgets with this hanging over their heads? And the answer was they can't. But that number is accurate, that they would be on the hook for $15 to $20 million each. On average in the Power Four. I had written a story, earlier this year. These questions popped into my head. So how could they afford it? It's another massive expense. Well, they can't afford it. The athletic department can borrow from the school. The school could borrow from a bank if it's that big. And as I was told in research for this story, universities are absolutely great customers for banks because the banks know they're going to get their money back.
Right.
And we're not talking about a year. It could be a 30-year note. It could be like buying a house.
Yeah.
So they can afford it. State subsidies, what have you. The bigger issue is getting it done so they can progress. Even if they get this done, if they get this settled, these lawsuits settled, it doesn't stop the spigot of possible lawsuits. It doesn't stop NIL, and it doesn't stop collectives. So I've come to the conclusion, Steve, that I think just cutting to the chase, it's going to have to be employee-employer relationship, collective bargaining. You can get rid of all this stuff. That'll take another few years probably, but this is a step.
And yes, I do read all your stuff. You know that.
Somebody does. You're the guy.
Yeah, I'm the guy. Just like every once in a while you hear me do a game, you're the guy.
That's right.
So Dennis, the next part is, I think it was the Fiesta Bowl hosted it, where they had the bowl reps. How important could collective bargaining be to solving their opt-out problem?
Well, this speaks to the reason why you need collective bargaining and an employee-employer relationship. You can't compel players to participate. No pro player has written into his contract, you have to play in the World Series. You have to play in the Stanley Cup. Why would you?
Right.
Yeah, you'd be foolish. Your agent said you'd be foolish to do that. Why would you do that? Why hurt yourself? There's a legal term called a specific performance clause that applies here that you don't see in those contracts. Specific performance says it has nothing to do with money. It's something like if you have, let's say, a prenuptial agreement and you get divorced and one person gets the dog, you have to do that. That's a specific performance. No one can compel you to play. Now, can you write it into an agreement? Again, I think they'd be dumb to write that in there. Because who is going to decide, for instance, if you're healthy enough to play? If you want the right to opt out, if you're Bryce Young and the decision for a playoff is $30 million guaranteed, number one choice, you might break your leg playing 4 extra games. And I'm not endorsing it.
Right.
I'm just saying those are the factors here. So when I saw that story, I said it was from 2 sources who absolutely are interested in players playing in bowls. The head of the bowls, Nick Carparelli, and Eric Moses, who's the head of the Fiesta Bowl. But I made some calls this morning. You can't compel players to participate.
What if they have a contract that would state that if in given year, whatever game we play in, you have to be available for?
Well, I think the collectives could do it.
Yeah.
But if those players are getting any kind of representation at all, that would have to be scrutinized. And then you're talking about, to make it stick, every collective doing it. To do the deal. So, again, if I'm Caleb Williams, I don't have that in my deal because, I can go somewhere else and get the money where it's not in my deal. If I get up there and I'm the number one draft choice, we're probably talking about a very small amount of players.
Sure. Right.
But I don't know if there's a way. I think there's a way. In fact, I know there's a way you can reward players for participating. I mean, there's already word out there that Fox was trying to put together a postseason basketball tournament with their TV partners, Big 12, Big 10, I forget who else, schools that didn't make the tournament.
Big East.
And then they would, Big East, and players would get money, NIL money, for participating. But that's not the same thing. We're talking about 2 different things.
Right. They are 2 different things. Traditionally, in your research, how tough a negotiator is Kessler?
He's the best. You don't want to be tangled up with him. This is a guy who, through many of the machinations we're talking about right now, created the NFLPA.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would submit, along with the Major League Baseball Players Association, and maybe the most powerful labor union on earth, one of them. So when I called him the other night to get a comment on this revenue sharing thing, he didn't have a comment. He didn't want to speculate on it. But I think he sees a way here because, look, he's going to get whatever his money is, 30% or whatever it is. I think he wants these done too, but he is a change agent. He is going to be the guy when they write the book. If if and when we have employee-employee relationships in college, who is going to be in the first sentence of the first chapter. Yeah. He's a Marvin Miller type. Although Marvin Miller represented players, this guy, he's representing players as well. He's going to be that change agent.
You need to have a change agent or agents on the other side, though. So who are the change agents and the leaders on that side that can help make it happen so that he does become the ultimate change agent?
You mean agents that represent players?
I'm talking about the people that would negotiate the side to open the door to get this settled. Who's the leadership on that side?
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, I think you have to assume that the Big Ten and SEC are the leaders in that right now. In fact, I wrote that earlier this week because they've got the means and they've got the motivations. And obviously, the ACC and Big 12 are also involved. But I think you can assume the two commissioners of those, or the four commissioners of those leagues, are involved, and then the general counsels of those leagues.
Tony Petitti has a wide range in his background. How much can that help? Because he does have that wide range, whether it's TV or other negotiations and so forth.
I think I think him and Greg Sankey, in my personal opinion, are the leaders in this. They're very smart. They want to get this finalized. Whether it does to the point where there are no more massive lawsuits, I don't know. But I think they are being progressive and taking the next step. You remember on February 1st, they announced that joint advisory group between the two conferences, and that was really ominous. I thought at the time, like, oh, okay, they're not separating, but they're saying we got this, and I think that's part of that. I was told the joint advisory group isn't involved in this, but the people I just described, I think, are involved in this to get this to the next level.
Have you had any thoughts at all or conversations with anybody about, there's been a lot of expansion. Texas and Oklahoma paid the way to get out for the last year. Oregon and Washington are now in. People are wondering about Florida State. What are, if anything, are you hearing about Florida State?
Nothing lately, only that conceptually, if Florida State and Clemson get their way, then that provides a blueprint for the likes of Miami, maybe Virginia, North Carolina, and then the discussion becomes, is it a Big Three where the other schools sort of matriculate to the Big 12, and the ones I just mentioned are gobbled up by the Big Ten and SEC, or does the ACC continue to exist just in a diminished fashion? But there, from what I've read, and I don't, and all the court filings, it looks like there is a way out. It looks like name your price. There is a way they can buy out of this, Florida State, and then the other ones would have to, they have to get out first, and then the SEC and Big Ten can move in. I don't see any reason why Florida State, the SEC would want Florida State. They've got the state of Florida with Florida.
Right.
I'm sure Florida would be very against that. But Texas and Texas A&M are in the same conference, so
right, exactly.
Never say never.
Right, never say never. But there's also, to me, for the conferences, there's a common sense element that comes into play. Texas, Oklahoma played 3 years in the Big 12, then bought out the last year. Right? Oregon and Washington came in at a reduced number in the Big Ten. Common sense tells me that doesn't line up for Florida State of getting a jackpot if they get out.
No, that's why this is a thing. There are 12 years left in the ACC contract.
That's right.
I think ESPN can re-up. There's a look-in 2027, I think.
Okay.
And look, if you're ESPN, why wouldn't you renew it? You've got those schools at a bargain basement price. That's why they signed the deal.
Right.
That's the difference. Texas and Oklahoma in 21 were 3 or 4 years out from the end of their contract with the Big 12 and the rights holders, and they in fact gave notice in May of that year before they left we're not going to renew the grant of rights. So that should have told you something.
Sure.
With Florida, who's the Pac-12? Obviously, it was collapsing around them.
Yeah.
With less than a year to go. So that's the huge difference. So there's a lot of money in rights fees left in 12 years.
A lot of money left. Dennis, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. I know you jumped on with us late, and we appreciate it as always. And yes, I do read everything.
You'll be held to. It'll be a test at the end of the semester, Steve.
I'm looking forward to it. Bring it on. Bring it on.
All right. Thank you.
You bet, Dennis.